Well, hello again. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Elena Troulakis.
Hello.
I'm very glad that she took some time away from her studio in London to be here with us today. Elena and I met 5 years ago in a classroom like this one. It was the first day of class of a new program, so everybody had to go around the room and introduce themselves. And then when Elena's turn came, she said, "My name is Elena Troulakis," and she went on listing the basic milestone in her career in sales in the fashion industry. And most people, actually all people, were very impressed. And during a break, I remember asking you, in such a young age, and you have been already so accomplished, and I will never ever forget her answer. It was, "Yes, but I really want to design my own stuff."
Yes.
And that's something that has left over the years a really lasting impression, in part because I find it very interesting that someone presents ourselves to a group with one professional identity, and then a few minutes later tells you that's nice, but there's something else that's trying to be born. And also because I always felt, I got a kind of an experience of you telling me, actually reminding me of many friends that I had, that sometimes wherever they are, whatever they do, they will tell you, "Yes, but what I really want right now is to have a baby." You know that feeling? So you really felt that way. And her baby, her new brand, came up to be 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2.5.
So, floor is yours.
Thank you.
You.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm not used to talking about myself, so, bear with me with the I's and the me's, but it is a personal sort of story and a journey, so it is sort of my path to date and career. Babis kindly invited me to talk about, well, creativity, obviously, and its role in my life and work. And actually, going back to what he said, what I wanted to just say quickly before beginning was that there's not only one path to follow, because it's exactly that. I started off in a more business capacity in the fashion industry, and I've switched and I've made creativity the primary role in my professional life now. So that's something I wanted to emphasize, is that things can change, and it really depends on the choices you make and the risks you take and what you're prepared to do about it. So before I go ahead, I'll just really quickly say again, I'm now a fashion designer. Woo! And I started my own brand just over 2 years ago, and it is my name. It's Elena Troulakis, and I design women's ready-to-wear, designer level. And today I'm going to talk about my journey, and to give you background, I'm going to first start with my early inspirations, how creativity got to be part of my life, where it came from, what the sources were, how that developed, and then talk a little bit about starting and launching my own brand and how creativity suddenly switched to become the primary role in my life rather than a sort of a dream or a faraway idea or a hobby. And then I'll take you through the creative process, which is very specific to being a fashion designer. What is the approach in creating a new collection every season? What are the steps and some of the behind-the-scenes work that I do, just to give you a sense of what it is to be a designer. So I'll just start with the early days. So really, creativity came into my life really early. I was really young when I had, I looked up to a few, young women who, one particularly was a fashion student. She was studying design, and I was like 7, so I didn't know anything. But she showed me a lot. I was looking at her illustrations, I was looking at her work, I was all excited about it. She would show me magazines, and I was just really inspired. It seemed like there was an affinity, like something that just caught me in what she was doing. So I would try to imitate her drawings, and I'd do my own sketches, if I can. But this was not when I was 7. It was when I was a little bit older. If you saw my sketches at 7, they were not really so interesting. Not that these are, but they were a little bit more naive, I guess. And so slowly I just started sketching these elongated figures, fashion illustrations, and I just loved it from a really early age. Secondly, so that opened the world of fashion to me really early. And then secondly, my mum is passionate about fine arts. And we grew up in London, and she used to take us to all the museums and the exhibitions, and she would teach us this movement and that brush stroke and this color palette. And so it was like something that was kind of by osmosis, I guess. Just was very interesting to me, and I started taking art classes at school and drawing. So anyway, she introduced us to my sister and I to these wonderful artists, and who I found inspirational. And so slowly, I started taking art more seriously at school alongside my normal studies. Loved figure drawing, pretty much everything related to now fashion. So I loved dance. Started doing my own stuff. I loved painting and color. I did a lot of color theory, draping and texture, three-dimensional forms. So I was doing a lot of art at school alongside my studies. And that kind of continued until, one day you have to make a choice. Are you going to go to fashion design school, or are you going to go and do something else? So I had looked at schools in Paris. I had gone and I looked at various fashion design schools because that's where my heart was. But my mind was in a bit more of a rational place, I guess. It was like, keep your options open, don't get in there so early, and leave other opportunities behind. Hello, come in. And so I decided to follow the liberal arts route. Plus, I just want to mention that nobody in my family really had a creative profession or came from a creative background necessarily. So it was a kind of unfamiliar territory for us. And it was a more uncertain choice. And perhaps at the time I wasn't even strong enough to say, that's the only thing I want to do. But I loved it. And it was always in my heart and in my desire to become a fashion designer or to get involved in that way. So I decided to get a liberal arts degree. I went to UPenn and I did PPE, philosophy, politics, economics. But I also studied fine arts. So I kept the art going in my life. And in the summers, I interned for fashion designers all over the place, wherever I could, get in there, because it's not an easy world. I would go and find a place to live and, learn the ropes and get my experience. And finally, when I finished my BA, I said, okay, Paris. I'm going to go to Paris, and I'm going to get in there and get into the fashion industry and do what I love. And I did my first master's in fashion marketing. And I worked for designers. I worked backstage at shows. I did menial work. I did all sorts of things just to get my hands in and, get a feeling of what it was to be part of that world. But my initial career, as Babis was saying, was really in sales. So I spent the next pretty much 8, 9, almost 10 years building a career in business and in fashion business, essentially. I started off at Emmanuel Ungaro, then Yves Saint Laurent in Paris, and then I spent 6 years at Matthew Williamson in London, which was then an emerging fashion brand. Obviously, I loved the business side. It was very interesting to me as well. I was learning how the business of fashion works, really, and getting a great exposure working for these wonderful brands over that 8-9 year period. But it was definitely a career in the sales. I was doing international sales and managing the business for these brands, business development. So it was definitely more in the sales side of things than in the creative side of things. But I tried to soak in whatever I could, wherever I was. So at Matthew Williamson, for example, it was a very small company at the time. It was growing. And I had a great exposure to all the different departments. And I tried to get in there and understand, how does this work? What does this department do? What does the creative department do? What's the process? And so it gave me a great insight, because I was thinking in the little back of my head, one day I'm going to want to do this too. And, what do I need to know? So I kept dreaming the whole time. I did my own designs. I continued illustrating and drawing and creating on the side. And then it comes to the next sort of crucial crossroads in my journey, which was develop your business career or make the leap and get into the creative side of things. And so that was a big choice. It is never too late. Which path is it to follow? It was a big thing because when you have a part of you is a creatively driven, and the other part is quite rational and business driven and down to earth, this kind of becomes a challenge. Because you can't, I was having a hard time saying, I'm going to be the best sales director, in the fashion world. Because every 6 months in the back of my mind, I'd have a little poke. Why aren't you doing what you want? Why aren't you doing your passion? Why, And then the design side was a completely new story for me and a new chapter, very unfamiliar. So it was a big risk. But I really felt at a certain point that it was time to make a decision between bringing creativity and giving it a primary role in my life or continuing on the business side of things primarily. I decided to take the risk and to make the leap. And so I went down the design route, and my husband was also very encouraging, and that made a big difference, and my family. So I went out there and I took a big leap of faith, and I landed, and I landed into a big vat of uncertainty, because being a creatively led it raises so many new interesting challenges that you don't have. I didn't have being really primarily on the business side of things. Not only becoming a designer, but also creating a new business, right? Because you no longer have the brand behind you. You're out there on your own, and you have to establish your name, your identity, who you are, what you're offering, how is it distinctive. You've got to do it. And so you are faced with a lot of uncertainty, and it's exciting, and it's a challenge. And in many ways, you approach it like you approach a business problem. I mean, what's my market? What's my target? What's my product? What's my identity? All of those things, and they're all creative. So they overlap, for sure. And you slowly start working through all these questions, which my MBA at London Business School did help me to answer. Okay, it gave me some frameworks. I focused on entrepreneurship there, and it was just before I launched my brand, so it did give me some grounding. You also, when creativity becomes the primary role, you seek approval. You need credibility. You want to be credible as a designer. Sure, I wanted to be credible as a sales manager or director, but that was more, to me, scientific. Here, I had other things to prove. I still do. I mean, I have other things to prove. It's a lot more about what you're actually creating, what your ideas are, what are the concepts, what are you offering to people, why should they buy your brand and your clothes, what makes you different. So it's a different kind of sort of credibility that you feel like you're seeking as a creative person. And I think every creative person, there's always doubts about their work. You go back and forth. Nothing is ever good enough or perfect enough. You always feel you can do better. You always feel you can refine more. But you have to learn how to stop, and you have to learn how to take it step by step. And that was a huge learning for me. And slowly, you do gain your confidence with time. So you have to go through the challenge, I would say. Having a creative business, the role of creativity within the business is vital. I mean, you've got to think creatively around everything, because when you're creating, when you're developing or launching a business, and that's just, I wanted to touch upon this, creativity is everywhere. You're creating your image, you're creating your identity. You have to define what is the DNA of your brand. What does it really mean? Why are people gonna, like I said, why are they gonna buy you? The first impression is so important. You know, like if somebody sees your business card, they feel something. They might feel quirky, they might feel funny, they might feel sophisticated, luxury, whatever, but they're going to feel something when they go to your web page, when they see your product. So all of that sort of vision needs to come together to create a single vision and a single message. And that really takes a lot of time, and it took me a lot of time personally to dig deep, get away from the sales, almost say, I don't care, whatever, you know, and dig deep and find out what are those elements that are key and are going to be key to my brand. So creativity, especially at the beginning of starting a business like that, is super important. But it also needs to evolve. And that's something I've sort of experienced and learned in the last 3 years doing this exercise, is that it takes time to find your DNA anyway, because you need to work at it actively. But even when you do start finding those key elements, you can't just get stuck there. You need to make sure that you're always pushing yourself forward and that you're remaining true to those elements, but you're taking it one step further every time. And you're giving people something new and something interesting to keep them engaged in what you're doing and in your vision. And in reality, if you really look at it, you know, design, the actual creative work of creating a new product every time, is really a small part of the whole picture when you're in a business, because fashion is a business. It's not fine arts necessarily, even though I'm sure people would argue that that's also a business. You know, you have to try and sell, you have to try and promote yourself, you have to get your logistics right, you have to get, you know, the technical side right, the production, everything. So increasingly, design becomes a smaller percentage actually of how much of your time once you start establishing yourself. Not that I'm also speaking for bigger companies, not in my stage necessarily, but all these other things need to be addressed too. And creativity in terms of the actual design side can kind of take a smaller role sometimes. So it's a lot to kind of balance, and they're all important. It's not like if you're a talented, great designer that you're going to do well just because you're good at it. You have to address all the other pieces of the pie. So I just wanted to make that clear, because I spend a lot of time also on other things, not just on designing. I'm not just in my room designing. I don't know if I've moved really quickly. I think I might have. But I also wanted to talk to you about the creative process. So I'll take a breath and I won't go so fast. Because before I was on 40 minutes, so I'm like, and now I'm on 15, I think. I thought it might be interesting to give you a little bit of a background as to what I sit there and do every day as a designer. Because it's all well and done, you know, to say you got there, but also what is it about? And every designer, I think, who you may speak to, has a different approach to how they come up with a new collection and how they approach a new season every time. So I keep having to do that. So how we start, or I start, I think this is quite generally the case, is with research. You always have to keep that DNA clear. What is it that you're referencing every time? And that's why you see repeated elements in people's collection. If you walk through collections on style.com or wherever, you'll see that, you know, Balenciaga has certain things that you'll see every season, Prada, certain lines, silhouettes, etc. So that's sort of a DNA. So you've got to keep true to that, but as I said, you've got new ideas all the time. And every season is like a new mood. It's like a new girl. What is she doing this time, in my case, because it's women's? You know, where is she? How does she feel? Is she like in an English countryside mansion wearing furs and by a fireplace with I don't know what? Or is she like on a ski slope, like a little bit 60s? You know, what is she doing? So it's a mood. And you research. I research a lot in the past. I look at art. I look at sculpture, particularly. I look at architecture. I look at nature. A lot of my prints are inspired by natural elements. You might be inspired by travel, a trip. You know, you see things, you see everything, you see colors, you see new shapes, motifs, whatever it is. Or like walks in markets, often, you know, you'll see a button and it looks amazing and something rings in your mind, and so it becomes like an element on your mood board. So eventually you collect images, you collect stories, and you pull together a theme for the season, so that there's a common thread that goes through the collection, whether it has to do with, you know, if it's a bit Orientalist inspired, or the silhouette is like a certain way, it might be a bit more egg-shaped rather than A-line, or whatever it is. Like, there's a common thread that will run through your collection to give you a consistent story and a consistent vision for the season, while keeping true to your DNA. So these are just a couple of mood boards. This one is especially, I guess, relevant to my work because I work a lot with pleating. I guess I have the ancient Greek Hellenistic dress bug as a Greek, because I'm, you know, I get inspired by my own past. So, you know, you can see different elements here, pleating and draping, and actually graphic motifs that I used as well in this collection. This is from Spring Summer 13. Minoan, actually graphic motifs from vases, etc. And then the wisteria, which was a plant that actually I really got excited looking at over the spring, and I was taking photographs and all these things. And so I kind of pulled all of these things together in my mood board. This is just one of a few mood boards. And so you create your story and your feeling. And then you start looking at colors. I pay specifically a lot of attention to color choice and color palette. So I study color a lot with each collection. And fabrics. So you start looking at what are your colors, what are your fabrics for the season, before you even really start designing, because fabrics behave in different ways. So your silhouettes also need to be thought of in respect to what kind of fabrics you're using and how they'll drape, how they'll cut, how they'll form, etc. So you start getting, I also visit trade fairs, so I look at trends just to have an idea of what's going on in the world, and be inspired by new fabrics and things like this. So then, a lot of designers sketch. I like 3D work. So I work around a mannequin often to begin with. At least like a third of what I do, like the most interesting silhouettes that will come out every season, are because I've done 3D work. I don't know if this shows, but it doesn't show very well. These are all pleated garments, and you just can't see the pleating very clearly. And I pin and I cut and I create different shapes and I rework them a lot, all around a mannequin. So I want it to be three-dimensional. It's just, I guess, from sculpture that I used to do a lot of. This has come into my work, my creative process for designing. So these are just some things that I'll show you as well a little later. These are just first impressions, and they're all black, and I don't even know if you can see them. But there's a lot of hand draping going on and things like that, which I don't think is very visible. But in here, a little jacket with a lot of pleated collar and a pleated back. Anyway, it's the beginnings of ideas that I work with. And then I'll move to sketches and flat drawings, which are not like those illustrations that are super inspiring. They're just really, what is this thing? What's hanging off it? Where does the zipper go? You know, technical drawings. So these are the sketches, the next stage. And once I've done, let's say, 3D work, and I know that this shape is particularly inspiring or amazing for this collection, then I can even take that shape and on paper can evolve it into 5 different garments, because it's the concept, it's the idea. That's the hardest thing to land for a new collection. If you're introducing a new shape, why are you doing it? What does it stand for in your collection? Is it going to create that thread you're looking for? If it is, and you get to that point where you know, then you can develop that much easier on paper. It's just getting that initial concept out. You know, that's the hardest and most challenging part. And what I wanted to do, so then comes the most technical side of things, which is patterns. I would say that's the most scientific part of design. You know, I work with pattern cutters to develop my conceptual ideas into a real garment, because it's very technical. You know, if you have a pattern, you can multiply a garment and do it 1 billion times over again. It's very valuable because it's exactly how it needs to be cut, where the seams, everything that you need to make it is in the pattern. So a good pattern is crucial. And when you start a pattern, you know, I'll work with my pattern cutter and we'll go through the ideas. She'll make a first pattern and we'll sew a first toile, which is in a more basic fabric, for example, and we'll fit it. And we'll see where the problems are, because there are always problems, always. And then you'll do it again. And if you need to, you'll do it again. So hopefully you don't have to do it more than 2 or 3 times, because then it's a little excessive. But you know, it takes a while to get to the right finished product. And you know, I don't know how much of that is realized, especially if the pattern is complicated, or if the garment is particularly complicated. It takes even more and more time. So that can justify some of the prices that you might see out there. Okay, I'm not trying to justify mine, but I think it's important to appreciate the process, because we don't always think about what goes on behind one little dress or one jacket, or you know what, like, so there's a lot. So then after you've done the patterns, then you cut the fabrics. You cut the styles in the real fabrics, which you've chosen, which you've thought about the color palette. How is it all going to sit together on 3 rails? You know, is it going to look good? Is it going to stand together well? Are your colors going to work? Are your textures going to work together? Your shapes? All of that you have to do pre-cutting into the real fabrics, for example. So this is the first one I was in my 3D work that I showed you. It's a little pleated cover. This is a sort of a more Grecian gown. Also, it was in my pre-work, which I had done by hand, draping, etc. And then this one has a little bit more pizzazz, I guess, more layering. I don't know if you can see. You can see it on my website a bit better. But anyway, and of course, these ones were all given Greek goddess names. I've got to promote Greece somehow. And then this was a little pleated jacket as well. So with pleating on the collar, shorts, and a little top. Then, okay, good, actually, ended up being okay with time, I think. The last couple of things I wanted to share with you, so not to bore you too much, are about my prints, because I guess, talking about DNA, I should mention a little bit of what mine might be. It's all nice to be theoretical, but in practice. So I have an influence from my roots, and that is primarily found in the pleating that I do, and in the sculptural forms, and in draping. But I also do my own prints, and that I think is where my fine arts background kind of creeped in. So I design my own prints, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the process of designing a print, because right now also there's it's a print moment. There's a lot of prints going on. You know, like wonderful prints by Marika Transu, which is a Greek designer doing very, very well abroad. Peter Pilato, lots of prints going on, Erdem. And somehow I fell into this. Perhaps Matthew Williamson, where I used to work, was known for his prints, so I was inspired by that too, I don't know. But I work with placement prints. If you don't know what they are, I'll give you just a little brief explanation. Placement prints basically mean that when you're developing your print, you're developing the pattern too. So the print fits exactly to a pattern. So every measurement that you're designing on a print has to fit exactly onto the paper the way you want it. And it's a lot more work than doing, for example, an all-over print. I'm trying to see if anybody's wearing one, but I can't see anyone in the audience wearing one, where it's everywhere on the fabric, and it doesn't really matter, let's say, where it falls. You just cut it to the shape. But a placement print, you need to spend time to make sure that everything will fall exactly in the right place, in the right proportion, etc., etc., etc. So it just takes a lot of extra work. Spring Summer 12, I was inspired by this image which you saw before, wisteria. And what I do is I start by hand drawing. So I'll take pictures, or I'll sit there and I'll draw out my first initial shapes from the wisteria plant in this case. And then what I do then is I digitally develop them. So from a hand, my prints have a hand-drawn element to them, which I like. They have a graphic element, but they're not completely graphic. They have a sort of an artist's hand, let's say, a stroke that you can, it's more organic. So then I put them into, I work with them digitally, and I enhance them. I color them in, I play with the lines, I mirror them, I change them around, I create different shapes using different filters, etc., 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 to get to my end result. So so after the hand drawing comes the digital enhancement, and then comes the mirroring and symmetry. Like often, you see prints that kind of are basically symmetrical or mirroring each other, and actually that has quite a strong visual effect in clothing. Most of those prints are placement prints because they're specifically, they give you impact in specific places wherever they're placed on the body. So, and from that one wisteria, quite natural looking flower, you create this new aesthetic. It doesn't necessarily, I'm not a very floral person, so I don't want my prints to look very pretty and floral. So I create new shapes by developing and refining and evolving the prints digitally to give me the edge that I want. And then finally, it's cut into a garment. So this was a really successful piece from Spring Summer 12, a long tea dress where you can see that the waist, the skirt part is basically reflected at the top part, and it just has a really nice visual effect. And it has, because it has the white background in combination with a really bright coral and the dark outline, it's just quite an impressive visual image. And so it was cut into this piece, for example. And then the second and last sort of placement print I just wanted to share with you was the newest one from my newest collection. Here I also looked at flowers, strangely, because I'm saying I'm not a floral person. And it was hibiscus and oleander this season. And so I started hand drawing a few different elements. This was the hibiscus, and this was the oleander. And then this print became more detailed. So then I also introduced a graphic element this season, which, if you remember those Minoan vases in my mood board, okay, so that graphic element kind of is used here, and it, I think, gives it a bit of an oriental feeling. And I've done it in my own way. I've hand drawn it myself, whatever, but the inspiration came from there. So this is more delicate than the first print. It's much more detailed. There's more combinations of motifs and textures happening together, and I wanted to give it a different feeling from the Spring Summer 12 print that you saw. It's a little bit more romantic, possibly a little bit more decorative. And then I colored it in. And this is one version. I mean, I have maybe 3 or 4 different versions of color palette for these prints. And different ways also that I've combined the different elements together. This is just one example, so you can see how that evolved. So that's the next stage. And then this is just a close-up, all these lines are one by one, colored in. The outline is colored in one by one, the inside is filled, the other one has different colors, combinations, so it's quite a time-consuming process when you have this whole thing to do. But, then you tend to copy and paste once you get one done. Okay. And then these are just some examples of this print in the most recent collection and what it became. This is as well a placement print. This is the fairy dress, as my stylist calls it, in silk chiffon. This one was a longer gown with a deep V neck. And this one was another colorway, much brighter. It's like a bright sort of limey green that has a dégradé in the background. And it's a skirt and a bustier top. So just to show you a different version of the same print, but this one equally took as much time to color in because every single thing needs to be colored in with your new colors. So it's really like a work, quite a big work. And then finally, you know, it all comes together when you do your photo shoot and when you pull the collection together and create the final sort of vision. Often designers and I work with a trusted friend and art director, Claire Saprinsky, who does my helps me with my styling. And often designers use stylists because you're so close to the product at this stage after you've been through all of these steps that I've just mentioned, that you need sometimes a second eye to come in and like help you put it all together, I guess. And the more creative and wonderful that person is, the better for you. So I'm really lucky to be working with Claire, who helps me to pull together the vision into our photo shoot and, you know, and push actually the collection forward through styling. Because it's not always the individual pieces that are, you know, pushing the collection forward. It's how you present the vision at the end. And with styling, you can make it look actually quite interesting or more commercial or whatever. So you choose, and you choose how far you want to push it through accessorizing, through the color of the shoes, through, you know, whatever, the combination of the different garments and how you're going to present them. So I would say for this would be like the final sort of touch before you go into sales or, you know, hand over to the business side. This is the lookbook, and the photo shoot puts everything together and shows your merchandising and all your work. And it should show it in its glory if all goes well. So anyway, that's really how the creative process works in my world. And I hope it was interesting for you and something different and new. Really, the one message I would say, you know, that it takes time to transition into something new. But I think if you believe in yourself, and you've always got to have that as a basis in order to get through all the other stuff, because there's a lot of other stuff, then you can achieve your goals and you can do what you want. It's just a matter of choice and effort and desire. So thank you very much.
People comment on it, and my question would be, who is your audience?
So, well, my target sort of consumer, or my target audience in terms of stores, or?
Who is the audience that you really care about most?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously I care about the industry opinion. So I care about what the stores might say or what press might say. I don't do fashion shows yet, so I'm not exposed really in the way of maybe a lot of other designers, because I'm still early on in my work. So the people who I really care about what they think are the people that I trust with their opinion, and they're people who have some influence in the industry. And those are more personal relationships. But then of course, like the showroom I work with is the #1 person who I care about. Do they like this collection? Do they feel like it can sell? Or is it more difficult this season? Less commercial? You know, what do they think? And then of course, like the consumers, like the actual, I work a lot with private clients. So I care about what they think and if they respond to a collection or not, and how. So I think it depends on who.
Just trying to picture you how
Sorry.
your likely reaction if someone tells you something that you don't like to hear.
Oh, but you have to be ready for that. And that's the hard part, being, you know, having the creative be a primary role. Because you're no longer sheltered by numbers or like, this is something that I'm objective and it's objectified. It's you. So, but you have to be ready to get feedback and to hear things that you don't want to hear. Because I look at it like, especially if I respect that person's opinion, it's only going to make me stronger to get feedback. and to listen to what somebody has to say. And I think you have to filter that.
Let's see if we have some questions for Elena, please.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Listening you talking about the early steps of the creative process and the mood boards and the color palettes and the fabrics and early designs and so on, I wonder how is the selection process going on? What type of selection process is going on there, and trial and error things, and how do you go about deciding on which way to go?
What anchors me is, am I being true to what my brand is? And I think that helps you from straying too far off. Sometimes I stray too far off, and I get told that I do from the people that I'm supposed to listen to. But I think you've got to always remember, does it make sense to what you're offering people and what they think of you and what your vision is and what you're trying to show? And so if you go way too far, you've always got that compass that will help you refine and at least put it in the right place. Even if you're going to try something very different, you kind of can create it in a way that still remains true to what your brand is. And I think that is a huge anchor, and knowing your DNA and your anchor is very hard, and it takes time. So it doesn't happen like overnight that you decide, oh, these are my 3 key elements of my collection. It takes a lot of time, and when you get to that closer and closer, you just make sure that you keep it there. If it's femininity, if it's elegance, if it's pleating, if it's sculpture, whatever it is, that you know what it is and you stay true to that. So you use that as a bit of a compass to refining and selecting inspirations, details, and things like that. Is that what you were asking me? Yeah. Yeah, hi.
My name is Kingsley.
Hi.
I just want to ask, how do you try to create a link between, your products, your products, the product of your creative process, with the commercial viability in the market? Considering that you'll be competing against very big names like St. Laurent, Zara, and all the rest, how did you go about, creating for yourself a niche, a competitive advantage?
Well, I'm still doing that, to be honest, but I think I decided that I did want to be part of one of the most competitive parts of the market, which is designer level. So it's like, because I think that would be considered one of the more creative sections of the market. It's also a more higher price point, so you really have to show something different. So it was already, it was a hard section to kind of target to begin with. But I think that it also was by trial and error a little bit at the beginning, because I suddenly started doing prints and people were responding to them. So I started seeing that that was a strength, and people liked that and they wanted it. And they were asking for it. And it's amazing to see how people might emotionally react to something. I'd never seen that before. And it says to you, oh, that's a direction that maybe I should look at more. And then my pleading was clear to me that it was something that I really enjoyed. And again, some of that got a lot of response. So it kind of helped me, like the market actually helped me as well, to take some of the other things I did, got no response, and I was like, oh, well, we tried that. It didn't really get me anywhere with that group, so leave it and focus on the things that are actually working. So I think it's a bit of you've got to get it out there, try different things, and you'll see what comes back to you in a way. Yeah. Yes?
Yes, Maria?
Please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, hi.
Hi.
I would like to ask if one product of yours, one piece, combines creativity and innovation, that seems that will not be so much commercial. It doesn't seem to be a bestseller. Will you launch it? I mean that creativity is a priority or commerciality. I know, because I work in the marketing department, that the combination of the two of them is the best solution. But if you have to choose, because you are in a market that creativity is very, very much important, and the innovation also. So how
does that work? I tell you, it's a very good question because it's one that I actually deal with every day. And it actually is a question that when I do create a new collection, I have to be very careful about. Because your instinct is to become more innovative and to create something different and special, and you don't really care maybe if it sells or not. But you do need to care. And what I think happens is you do have to push yourself every time to create some of those things that are less commercial but more interesting, and you will put them in your collection and you will photograph them because it shows that they're progressive and it shows that you're moving forward, but you will always take care to have the commercial substance in there, always. And it's going to be the majority, to be very honest. It's only going to be, where I used to work, for example, the Catwalk shows were the 10 to 15, maybe 20% of a collection where the design team was really allowed to go a bit crazy and have fun with it and go a bit wacky and really drive the image and the direction across to people. The showroom collection, which I was selling, was very different. And some people would buy some of the showpieces, but I wouldn't be able to sell a collection of showpieces. So I think you've got to keep it in there, definitely, and you've got to do it, but you've got to be addressing the market at the end of the day. So maybe that has even more weight today, sometimes, depending on where you are. Yes?
Are you ever surprised by which pieces are the most successful in your collection? Like, let's say, do you have an idea of, oh, I think this one will do really well, for example.
Yeah.
But actually, after the whole process is completed and you see your client's responses, is it different than what you expected?
Yeah, it does happen, actually. I think there's certain things that you just love and you just feel like they're going to be a winner. And some of the time, you're right, because it is an instinctive thing. And I think if you love it, somehow that kind of comes across. But I've often been surprised at what people, what I thought was like a really simple shape, let's say, and but it had a great print, but it went really, really well, and people just had an enormous reaction to it. So that happens, yeah. And it happened not only now, but also where I was in the sales side of things. You often get surprised by what people, end up picking up. But you can also influence a lot what people will pick up, because you also want people to pick up things that are very much the brand, so you can influence selection sometimes. But yeah, you get surprises for sure. Yes.
Can I ask what percentage of your time do you actually occupy with the design process? Because that was your initial dream, design. And because now you run your own brand, you have to also take care for all the other administration stuff like logistics.
Yeah.
Is that satisfied for you? What's the percentage that does this satisfy you?
So I think because I'm such a small brand still, I do spend a lot of time on the creative side because I feel like it's still really important for me to keep that very, very potent and strong, and I really need to make sure that that's a priority. But so right now, I would say though that it is, it's almost 50-50 at this stage. I think if it evolves, it'll become less on the design almost for a while, because the other parts do take up a lot of time. And you, especially, unless you have a lot of other people doing all these other things for you, you need to do it, and you need to be on top of it. So at the moment, I would say half-half. But I think that sometimes it probably is closer to 60-40, not on the design side, because there's a lot of other things to think about and do. So I'm happy with the balance for now. I think that it's okay, because I do have time to be creative, and I do have time to think about my collections. But I don't know how that will evolve. Yeah, question mark. Anyone else?
Let's get one last question.
Okay.
Please.
Yes.
Does each period, does your mood affect your choices in colors you make for each collection? I mean, we can sense a designer's mood.
Yes.
The colors
Yeah.
I would like to.
That's a good question too. Yeah, I think in some ways it does, because I don't think it's though like a day-to-day mood. It's more of a period. Because this whole process, I only do 2 collections a year, I don't do 4. So it's over 6 months that this whole thing happens. And okay, the color choice you have to make early, you don't make it at the end, but it's more of a wave. It feels like a wave of color, and that wave is a mood. And yes, like for example, this collection was much softer. It had a lot more pastels happening, a lot more lilacs and softer colors, and it was very pleasing and harmonious. The one before was like, you know, a lot more contrast, much brighter, and that's how I felt, I guess, at the time. So yes, and you're also influenced by what is happening around you, I think. Yeah, sometimes you want to be bolder with your color, and sometimes you don't. So I think it can do, yeah, it can affect.
Elena, where would you like to be 5 years from now? Professionally, creatively, personally?
Well, I would love for my business to have evolved, and for me to be able to continue to be creative and to continue the work, really, and to grow. That's, you know, so in 5 years, if I'm still going and I'm growing, I'll be happy.
Well, we'll be here to watch you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
For joining.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you.